Everybody encounters pain and destruction in their life, whether it be the pain of death, illness, or heartache. Some stories have catastrophic endings and affect people's lives all around the world. Some of these stories are sad, while others are unbelievable. Before we begin this video, we would like to express our deepest sympathies to the family and friends who were severely touched by this horrible crime. We have no malicious intentions, but recognize that the people concerned are dealing with a very delicate situation. In 1985, the Colombian government made the error of ignoring a series of geological reports that advised evicting a couple of small towns. This is the tale of Omayra Sanchez, a 13-year-old girl who became trapped in the water and endured a brutal 60-hour battle for survival that broke the hearts of hundreds of thousands of people around the world. In today's video, we travel to Colombia, which is also known as the Republic of Colombia. It is a South American nation with insular areas between the Caribbean and Pacific Oceans in North America. It has a population of 52 million. The language, religion, food, and art of Colombia reflect its past as a Spanish colony, fusing cultural elements brought by immigrants from Europe and the Middle East, as well as those brought by enslaved Africans, as well as those of the various indigenous civilizations that existed before colonization. Although English and 64 other languages are recognized as regional tongues, Spanish is the official state language. There have been a number of rebellions against Spanish control since the beginning of the conquest and colonization eras, but the majority of them were crushed or remained too weak to affect the broader situation. The Colombian Declaration of Independence, which was made on July 20, 1810, the day that is now observed as the country's Independence Day, was the result of the last one that aspired to complete independence from Spain. It began about 1810. There are several different climate zones in Colombia, including tropical rainforests, savannas, steppes, deserts, and mountainous regions. Colombia ranks top in bird species and is one of the countries with the highest biodiversity. With the highest species per unit of area and the most endemisms, species that are naturally found nowhere else, of any country, Colombia has the highest biodiversity on Earth. A little community called Armero is located 169 kilometers from the main city. The third largest town in the Tolima department after Ibagué and Espinal was Armero, which was situated 169 kilometers from Bogotá, the capital of Colombia, and 48 kilometers from the Nevado del Ruiz volcano. It was a significant agricultural town before the eruption, producing a significant portion of Colombia's cotton, sorghum, and coffee crops in addition to about 1/5 of the country's rice. Since Nevado del Ruiz's fertile volcanic soil encourages agricultural growth, a large portion of its success can be credited to it. The town was previously damaged by a volcanic eruption in 1595 and by mudflows in 1845 before being built on top of an alluvial fan that had previously been home to historical lahars. 3 different Plinian eruptions in the 1595 eruption resulted in lahars that killed 636 people. Mudflows caused by the 1845 incidence earthquake along the Magdalena River claimed 1,000 lives. The first of Ruiz's 3 major eruptive episodes started 1.8 million years ago. It has erupted at least 12 times since the beginning of the current era, 11,000 years ago, resulting in ashfalls, pyroclastic flows, and lahars. Geologists first noted an increase in seismic activity near Nevado del Ruiz in late 1984. Geologists were made aware of the potential for an eruption by rising evidence activity, sulfur buildup on the volcano's top, and groundwater eruptions. Debris episodes, which occur when rising magma strikes water, persisted long into September 1985. One significant event occurred on September 11, 1985, sending steam high. When the new magma had finished rising into Ruiz's volcanic edifice, activity began to slow down in October. Carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide were discovered in the gas samples taken from volcanoes erupting along the arena's crater floor by an Italian volcanological mission, indicating a direct liquid discharge into the surrounding environment. On October 22, 1985, the scientists published a study for government officials stating that the risk of floods and landslides was extremely high. The report provided local authorities with a number of straightforward preparatory measures. Signals were sent to the local authorities by another team, but no operating instructions were provided. As magma got closer to the surface in November 1985, volcanic activity picked back up. Sulfur dioxide and elemental sulfur-rich gases in greater amounts began arising from the volcano. Gases from the fumaroles lost some of their water content, and aluminium, calcium, and potassium absorbed from the magma into nearby water springs near Ruiz. At 17,500 feet above sea level, the Colombian volcano Nevado del Ruiz has been exhibiting symptoms of activity since the 1840s. By September 1985, the tremors had intensified to the point where they started to scare locals, primarily those living in surrounding towns like Omayra, a 31,000-person community located about 30 miles east of the volcano's heart. In 1985, the Nevado del Ruiz erupted on November 13th. A deadly lahar, or mudflow, was set off by the tiny explosion, which only melted 5 to 10% of the ice cap covering Stadium's volcano. The mudflow reached Omayra and engulfed 85% of the city in heavy, thick mud while moving at a speed of about 25 miles per hour. Roadways, homes, and bridges in the city were destroyed when mudflows up to a mile wide swallowed them. Those who were attempting to flee were also caught in the flood, many of them unable to do so due to the sheer power of the sand that flooded their small town. The majority of the residents of the town died, however others were fortunate enough to just sustain injuries. Up to 25,000 people passed away. Barely a fifth of Omayra's inhabitants lived to adulthood. Even with the terrible destruction, it would be hours before the first rescue attempt started. As a result, several people, like Omayra Sanchez, had to die horrifyingly slowly and trapped in the mud. The aborted Omayra Sanchez rescue. Omayra Sanchez talks with reporters in this 1985 Spanish-language news broadcast while she is on the verge of drowning in murky water. 2 days after the explosion, photojournalist Frank Fournier arrived in Bogotá. He ultimately arrived in Omayra after a 5-hour trip and a 2.5-hour hike, and he had planned to document the rescue operations there. But when he arrived, the situation was considerably worse than he had anticipated. Fournier found confusion and despair rather than a coordinated, smooth operation to rescue many of the residents who were still under the dirt. Hundreds of people were stranded all around. Rescuers were having a hard time getting to them. 2 decades after the horrible catastrophe, he told the BBC, "I could hear people shouting for aid, and then there was this odd calm. It was quite frightening." A farmer led him to a young girl who required assistance amidst the chaos. The girl had been imprisoned beneath her demolished home for 3 days, the farmer informed the boy. Omayra Sanchez was her name. Red Cross volunteers and neighborhood neighbors tried to get her out of the water, but she was unable to move because something beneath the water had pinned her legs. However, partly as a result of the ongoing rain, the water levels surrounding Sanchez became higher and higher. Sanchez had been exposed to the elements for too long by the time Fournier found her, and she started to drift in and out of consciousness. She told accompanying Tiempo reporter German Santa Maria, "I'm going to miss a year because I haven't attended to school for 2 days." Sanchez requested Fournier to drive her to school since she was concerned about being late. It appeared as though the teenager was prepared to accept her fate because the photographer could sense her power weakening. She told the volunteers to go and said goodbye to her mother. Lacking the surgical conditions to save her from the effects of an amputation, the doctors agreed it would be more humane to let her die. On November 16, Omayra Sanchez passed away, 3 hours after being located by Fournier. Thus, the news of Sanchez's passing was covered in the New York Times, quote, "At the time of her passing this morning at 9:45 a.m., she fell backward in the freezing water, an arm stretched out, and just her nose, lips, and one eye were left above the surface. Then someone put a blue and white striped tablecloth over her and her aunt." Fournier's wish came true. A few days later, his image of Omayra Sanchez, black-eyed, soaking, and hanging on for dear life, was featured in the Paris Match magazine. His unsettling photograph earned him the 1986 World Press Picture of the Year award and infuriated the populace. Photographer Frank Fournier, who captured Omayra Sanchez in her final moments, remarked, "She could tell that her life was disappearing." The world was baffled by Omayra Sanchez's well-documented, protracted death. How could a photojournalist simply observe a 13-year-old child perish? Because of how upsetting Fournier's famous image of Sanchez's suffering was, the Colombian government's essentially non-existent rescue efforts came under fire internationally. Rescuers in Omayra's instance lacked the tools necessary to save her. They didn't even have a water pump to remove the swelling water surrounding her. The little settlement was at least 80% destroyed by the dirt and water from the eruption. Omayra Sanchez's legs were later found to be stuck by a brick door, while her deceased aunt's arms were found submerged in water. Rescuers lacked the big machinery required to get her out, even if they had realized that early. Only a few Red Cross volunteers, civil defense personnel, and friends and family of the victims were reportedly seen by journalists at the scene combing through the muck and debris. Neither the 65,000 police officers nor the 100,000-strong Army of Colombia were sent to assist with rescue operations on the ground. Omayra became a symbol of the tragedy because she managed to remain calm and optimistic while having her life flash before her eyes. Frank Fournier, a French photographer, described what he observed when he arrived at Armero. "I reached the town of Armero at dawn, about 3 days after the explosion. There was a lot of confusion. People were in shock and desperate need of help. Many were trapped by debris. I met a farmer who told me of this young girl who needed help. He took me to her. She was almost on her own at the time, just a few people around and some rescuers helping someone else a bit further away. She was in a large puddle, trapped from the waist down by concrete and other debris from collapsed houses. She had been there for almost 3 days. Dawn was just breaking and the poor girl was in pain and very confused. There was this little girl and people were powerless to help her. The rescuers kept coming back to her, local farmers and some people who had some medical aid. They tried to comfort her. When I took the pictures, I felt totally powerless in front of this little girl who was facing death with courage and dignity. She could sense that her life was going. I felt that the only thing I could do was to report properly on the courage and suffering and the dignity of the little girl. At the time, I didn't realize how powerful this photograph was. The photograph was published in Parish Match magazine a few days later. People were very disturbed by it. People still find the picture disturbing. This highlights the lasting power of this little girl. I was lucky that I could act as a bridge to link people with her. There are hundreds of thousands of Omayras around the world, important stories about the poor and the weak, and we photojournalists are there to create the bridge. In the comments area below, please share your thoughts on this video. Your feedback will help me improve the next one. See you on the following video.